The year is 1685. Within the gilded confines of the sprawling Château de Valois, Lady Anneliese de Valois moved with an air of refined melancholy. Her days were a tapestry woven with lessons in etiquette, needlework, and courtly dances, each thread a testament to her noble birth, but also a binding constraint. At 18, she possessed a delicate beauty, her eyes the color of deep sapphires, often reflecting a wistfulness that belied her privileged existence. She was a flower in a golden cage, destined for a politically advantageous marriage, a pawn in the intricate game of power and alliances played by her formidable father, Duke Armand de Valois. Anneliese's world was one of predictable splendor, of rustling silks and hushed whispers, of powdered wigs and painted smiles. Yet, beneath the veneer of luxury, she felt a profound emptiness, a yearning for authenticity that the court could not provide. Her tutors spoke of poetry and philosophy, but her heart longed for stories of courage, of passion, untamed by titles or wealth. The men of her station, the young counts and marquises who vied for her attention, were uniformly bland, their conversations revolving around the states, horses, and the latest court gossip. She found them wanting, their ambitions shallow, their affections feigned. She often retreated to the vast library or the secluded corners of the garden, seeking solace in books and the quiet solitude they offered, away from the watchful eyes and suffocating expectations. That was during one such retreat, a morning walk through the meticulously manicured rose garden, that her gaze first truly snagged upon him. Sir Caelan Thorne, a new addition to the ducal guard, stood sentinel near the western gates. He was a figure of imposing stillness, clad in the polished cuirass and plumed helmet of the palace guard, his musket held at an unyielding attention. Cael, barely 2 years her senior, was unlike any man she had encountered. He carried himself with an innate dignity, a quiet strength that emanated from his very core. His jawline was strong, his eyes, even from a distance, seemed to hold an unwavering resolve, a deep, observant intelligence. He was not a courtier, fawning and flattering, but a man of duty, his presence a stark, grounding contrast to the fluttering frivolity around her. Annelise, accustomed to the guards being part of the background, an extension of the architecture, found herself returning to the window of her private salon more frequently, her eyes subtly seeking him out. She observed his strict discipline during drills, the precision of his movements, the respectful yet firm way he addressed his subordinates. He wasn't overtly handsome in the delicate, almost effeminate way some courtiers were. His was a rugged handsomeness, sculpted by discipline and physical exertion. His brown hair, short and practical beneath his helmet, occasionally caught the sunlight, revealing streaks of auburn. She noticed the slight tension in his shoulders, the subtle shift of his weight, signs of a man constantly alert, constantly aware of his surroundings. He was a silent protector, a stoic guardian of the very walls that imprisoned her. She overheard snippets of conversation about him from the household staff, that he was from a minor gentry family, his father a respected but impoverished knight, that he had earned his position through merit and unwavering loyalty. This only heightened her fascination. He was a man who built his worth not on inherited titles but on personal virtue and strength of character. He represented a world outside her golden cage, a world of clear purpose and tangible achievements, untainted by the political machinations of the court. His presence, though distant, became a quiet anchor in her restless days. She would find herself wondering about his thoughts, his dreams, the life he led beyond the palace walls. The idea was absurd, dangerous even, yet the seed of an unconventional curiosity had been planted deep within her heart, slowly beginning to sprout in the fertile ground of her discontent. She longed for a story of her own, a narrative not dictated by lineage but by genuine human connection. And in the steadfast sentinel, she began to perceive the first faint outlines of such a possibility. As the seasons turned from the vibrant hues of summer to the crisp solemnity of autumn, Lady Annelise's routine became subtly reordered, her internal compass now orienting itself with an unconscious bias towards Sir Caelan Thorne. She found excuses to traverse the wings of the palace that offered views of the courtyard where he was most often stationed. A stroll to the library might be extended to include a detour past a gallery window overlooking the parade grounds. A visit to her aunt's chambers would involve a leisurely pause by a window that afforded a distant glimpse of the western gate. These were not deliberate, overt acts, but rather an evolution of her daily movements, driven by an unacknowledged curiosity that was slowly blossoming into something more profound. she began to build a mental dossier of Kellen's habits and traits. She observed how he consistently maintained a vigilant posture, even during the quietest hours, his back straight, his gaze sweeping the grounds with an almost predatory focus. She noted the subtle cues of his professionalism, the immaculate state of his uniform, the gleam of his polished buckles and buttons, the unvarying rhythm of his patrol. While other guards occasionally slouched or exchanged whispers, Kalen remained a paragon of duty. This unwavering discipline, far from being monotonous, struck Annalise as a testament to his character, a quiet dedication that spoke volumes without a single uttered word. One particularly cold morning, she watched from her window as a stable boy, struggling with a heavy sack of feed, stumbled and spilled its contents across the cobblestones. Before any other guard reacted, Kalen, without hesitation, stepped forward. He didn't merely bark an order. He knelt, his plumed helmet almost touching the ground, and began to help the boy gather the scattered grains, his movements efficient and kind. He spoke a few quiet words to the child, whose face, initially etched with fear, relaxed into a shy smile. It was a fleeting moment, unobserved by most, but to Annalise, it was a revelation. It revealed a tenderness, a humanity beneath the stoic exterior, a warmth that was conspicuously absent among the calculating courtiers she was forced to endure. Her mind often wandered during her tedious lessons. While her governess droned on about heraldry, Annalise would find herself mentally replaying Kellen's gestures, analyzing the slight tilt of his head when listening, the way his fingers rested on the hilt of his sword. She contrasted his quiet strength with the boisterous, often performative masculinity of the young nobles who called upon her. They spoke of valor and honor, but Kalen lived it, not as a show, but as an inherent part of his being. She longed for genuine conversation, for depth of feeling, for a connection unburdened by social artifice. Her gilded cage felt heavier than ever, the conversations within its walls more suffocating. She saw him as a symbol of the authentic, the unvarnished truth she desperately craved. She recognized the immense chasm that separated them, a noblewoman, daughter of a duke, destined for a strategic marriage, and a palace guard, a man of humble origins, bound by oath and duty. The very thought of acknowledging her burgeoning fascination was treasonous to her station, a perilous flirtation with scandal that could ruin her, her family, and certainly him. Yet, the heart, she was discovering, did not heed the rigid decrees of societal order. Each fleeting glimpse, each observed act of quiet integrity, solidified his image in her mind, imbuing him with a heroic quality. He represented freedom, not the chaotic freedom of a vagabond, but the profound freedom of a man who lived by his own code of honor, uncorrupted by the machinations of the court. Annalise, for the first time in her life, began to feel the stirrings of a desire to break free, to reach beyond the ornate bars of her prison, towards the quiet strength of the steadfast sentinel. The incident occurred on a blustery spring afternoon in 1687, a day when the winds carried the scent of newly bloomed lilacs and the subtle tension of an approaching storm. Lady Annalise had sought refuge in the ducal rose garden, a sprawling labyrinth of geometrically arranged flower beds, marble statues, and bubbling fountains, designed to inspire contemplation. She was engrossed in a volume of French poetry, her mind far away from the court's demands, when a sudden gust of wind, more insistent than the others, tore a precious, freshly bloomed crimson rose from its stem. It tumbled to the meticulously raked gravel path near her feet, its petals scattering like droplets of blood. Annalise gasped, bending instinctively to retrieve the fragile bloom, a symbol of her own delicate and easily shattered existence. That as she reached for the rose, her hand brushed against something warm and firm. Startled, she looked up, her sapphire eyes meeting the steady, calm gaze of Sir Kalen Thorne. He had been on his routine patrol, his footsteps silent on the gravel, and had paused, noticing her distress. He was closer than she had ever seen him, his presence suddenly overwhelming, the scent of polished leather and clean linen, a stark contrast to the cloying perfumes of court, wafted gently towards her. His face, usually a mask of professional stoicism, held a fleeting expression of gentle concern. He was not looking at her with the calculating glint she saw in the eyes of her suitors, nor with the deferential awe of a servant, but with a simple, unaffected empathy. "My lady, allow me," he said, his voice a low rumble, surprisingly resonant, cutting through the rustle of leaves and her own racing heartbeat. It was the first time she had heard him speak directly to her, and the sound sent a peculiar tremor through her. He knelt, his movements fluid and unhurried despite the formality of his uniform, his gauntlet hand reaching for the rose before hers could. His fingers, strong and calloused, carefully picked up the bloom, then offered it to her, along with a few stray petals. Their fingertips brushed, a fleeting electric contact that sent a jolt through Annalise. The air crackled with an unspoken tension, an awareness that transcended their stations. Annalise felt a blush creep up her neck, her carefully cultivated composure threatening to unravel. She mumbled a barely audible thank you, Sir Calin, her eyes darting away. Embarrassed by her clumsiness and the sudden intimacy of the moment, she felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling both unfamiliar and exhilarating. Calin, ever the professional, rose smoothly, his posture impeccable once more. "It is my duty, my lady, to ensure your comfort and safety," he responded, his voice returning to a more formal tone. Yet his eyes lingered on hers for a fraction of a second longer than was strictly necessary. In that microsecond, she perceived a flicker of something in their depths, perhaps curiosity, perhaps a shared recognition of the unspoken. He gave a slight, respectful bow, then continued his patrol, his form disappearing amongst the topiary. Annalise was left standing amidst the roses, the fallen bloom clutched in her hand, its crimson petals now seeming to pulse with a vibrant, new meaning. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a drumbeat of sudden, unexpected emotion. The encounter was brief, lasting no more than a minute, yet it was momentous. The rigid wall of hierarchy that separated them had momentarily thinned, allowing a sliver of genuine human connection to pass through. She found herself replaying his words, the timbre of his voice, the sensation of his touch, the look in his eyes. He had treated her not as a duke's daughter, a prize to be won, but as a person, a woman in need of a small kindness. This simple act, this fleeting interaction, became a pivotal moment. The seed of curiosity had now taken root, nourished by a shared moment of unexpected grace, promising a dangerous bloom of its own. The memory of Sir Calin's steady gaze and the unexpected warmth of his touch lingered with Lady Annalise for days, then weeks, growing more potent with each passing moment. The simple act of him retrieving a fallen rose had shattered the carefully constructed detachment she maintained from the palace staff, particularly the guards, whom she had always viewed as part of the immutable, often tedious, landscape of her life. Now Calin was distinct, a living, breathing man with a resonant voice and kind eyes, an individual who sparked an unfamiliar and exhilarating curiosity within her. Her fascination with him deepened, evolving from mere observation to an almost compulsive seeking. Annalise found herself subtly altering her daily patterns, making detours to corridors where she knew his patrol route often took him, lingering a moment longer by windows that afforded a view of the courtyard where he might be standing guard. She developed an uncanny awareness of his presence, a faint tremor in the air, a subtle shift in the palace's rhythm that signaled his proximity. Her heart would quicken, a silent, internal flutter that she struggled to control. She would prepare herself, compose her features into an expression of serene indifference, only to feel her breath catch when he appeared, a solid, unwavering presence in her periphery. She began to contrast his unwavering honesty and quiet strength with the duplicity and superficiality that permeated the court. The men of her social standing, the eligible bachelors her father paraded before her, seemed to her increasingly like painted puppets, their charm shallow, their intentions transparently. They spoke in flowery platitudes, their compliments often dripping with insincerity. Calin, by contrast, spoke rarely, but when he did, his words, though formal, carried the weight of truth. He was devoid of artifice, a refreshing anomaly in a world built on masks and pretense. His silent presence was more eloquent than any courtier's elaborate speech. Annalise spent hours in her private salon, lost in thought, gazing out at the vast ducal lands that stretched beyond the palace walls. She imagined Calin in a different life, one free from the confines of her father's court, perhaps riding across those very fields, a knight of old, noble and true. Her imagination, long suppressed by the strictures of her upbringing, began to bloom with vivid scenarios, picturing herself by his side, away from the suffocating expectations. She recognized the sheer absurdity of these fantasies, the impossibility of such a connection. She was the Duke's daughter, destined to marry for alliance, for political gain, for the perpetuation of her lineage. He was a guard, bound by oath, and an unbridgeable social chasm. To entertain such thoughts was not merely foolish, it was dangerous, a transgression of the highest order. Yet, the more she tried to quash these burgeoning feelings, the more stubbornly they took root. Her internal conflict was agonizing. Her duty, her family's honor, the centuries of tradition that defined her existence, all dictated that she extinguish this nascent affection. But her heart, once a quiet, compliant vessel, now pulsed with a rebellious beat, drawn inexorably towards the unwavering integrity she perceived in Callan. She felt a profound loneliness amidst the throng of courtiers, a solitude that only his distant, silent presence seemed to alleviate. He was a beacon of truth in her gilded cage, a dangerous, irresistible light in her meticulously ordered world. The risk of her fascination was immense, the consequences potentially ruinous for them both, but the prospect of living without this newfound exhilarating awareness of him felt like a far greater punishment. Her soul was stirring, awakening to a passion that dared to defy the rigid decrees of her birth. Propelled by the magnetic pull of a man she barely knew, yet felt she understood profoundly. The invisible threads of Lady Annalise's fascination, once meticulously concealed, began to subtly manifest, weaving a new, delicate pattern into the fabric of the Château de Valois. What started as her unilateral observations slowly, almost imperceptibly, transitioned into a mutual, albeit unspoken, awareness. Sir Callan Thorne, ever vigilant, ever attuned to his surroundings, was not oblivious. He felt the weight of her gaze, not as a direct stare, but as a persistent, almost ethereal presence that accompanied her passage through the palace. It was a subtle shift in the air, a fleeting shadow, a particular stillness that fell upon the scene whenever Lady Annalise was nearby. He would be stationed at a corridor archway, his eyes scanning for potential threats when a rustle of silk would herald her approach. His training dictated absolute composure, an unwavering focus on duty. Yet, as she passed, a flicker in his peripheral vision, a scent of jasmine and expensive fabric, would register. He wouldn't turn his head, wouldn't alter his posture, but his internal senses would heighten. He learned the rhythm of her movements, the gentle sway of her gown, the almost imperceptible hesitation she sometimes made near his post. His professional demeanor remained impeccable, a testament to his iron will. But beneath the polished armor, a quiet, dangerous recognition began to stir. One evening, during a lavish court ball, Callan stood guard near the grand staircase, a tableau of shimmering gowns and powdered wigs swirling around him. Annalise descended the stairs, her gown, a vision of emerald green, her eyes sparkling amidst the forced smiles. As she reached the bottom, her path briefly intersected his. For a mere heartbeat, their eyes met. There was no overt flirtation, no scandalous glance. It was a look of profound, silent understanding. In that instant, Callan saw not just his duke's daughter, but the intelligent, yearning woman whose quiet observations had become a palpable presence in his life. And Annalise saw not just a guard, but the steadfast, honorable man whose quiet integrity had captivated her. It was a moment charged with a dangerous intimacy, a shared secret suspended in the air before the exigencies of court life pulled them apart. Callan's internal struggle was immense. To acknowledge such a connection, even fleetingly, was to invite ruin. The social chasm separating them was not merely broad, it was a precipice. Any transgression, any hint of impropriety, would not only cost him his position and honor, but very possibly his life. He was a man of duty, a knight's son, sworn to protect the very family whose daughter now posed the greatest threat to his carefully constructed world. He knew the stories of guards who had dared to look above their station. They ended in dungeons, or worse. He chastised himself, attempting to recenter his focus, to banish the image of her sapphire eyes and the unexpected understanding he'd found within them. Yet the awareness persisted. He began to notice her subtle signals, the slight, almost imperceptible nod of her head if she passed him on an isolated corridor, the way her hand might linger near a piece of embroidery near his post. He never responded overtly, always maintaining the rigid decorum of his station, but he registered them. He began to perceive her subtle melancholy, a sadness that echoed his own quiet isolation within the palace's grandeur. A dangerous empathy bloomed within him. He was tasked with protecting her, and now, paradoxically, his greatest challenge was protecting himself from her quiet allure, and, in a way, protecting her from the inevitable scandal if their unspoken understanding ever became spoken. The air between them, once merely space, now hummed with the silent, fraught communication of two souls drawn together against the tide of an unforgiving world, united by the profound, unspoken risk they both now carried. The unspoken understanding, once a delicate thread, began to strain under the weight of its own intensity. Lady Annalise found the silent exchanges agonizingly insufficient. Her fascination had solidified into a profound affection, a yearning for direct connection that surpassed all caution. The rigid protocols of court, the constant surveillance, made any direct communication seem utterly impossible. Yet, the urgency of her feelings left her no peace. She felt a compelling need to bridge the chasm between them, to transform the silent glances into spoken words, however perilous the endeavor. Her mind, accustomed to navigating the intricate social mazes of court, began to devise a plan. She needed an intermediary, someone utterly trustworthy, someone who moved within the palace hierarchy without attracting undue attention. Her lady's maid, Ilara, a quiet, unassuming girl who had served Annalise since childhood, came to mind. Ilara possessed a keen intelligence and an unwavering loyalty, often overlooked due to her modest demeanor. Annalise confided in her, carefully, hinting at a personal matter that required utmost discretion. Ilara, sensing the gravity in her mistress's voice, promised her silence and assistance. One late afternoon, in the early spring of 1688, Annalise penned a short, concise note on a small piece of parchment, her hand trembling slightly with a mix of fear and exhilarating defiance. Her words were carefully chosen, devoid of overt sentiment, yet carrying the profound weight of her suppressed emotions. "Sir Calin, I implore you for a moment of your time. Meet me by the old sundial in the west garden. After the moon rises and the last watch changes, Annalise." She folded it into a tiny square, sealing it with a drop of crimson wax, impressing her personal, unassuming signet ring, a simple rose, into the softened wax. It was a perilous missive, a direct invitation to scandal, a gamble with both their futures. Ilara, with a practiced subtlety, honed by years in service, managed to deliver the note. Her opportunity arose when Calin, on a rare moment of respite, was polishing his cuirass in a secluded courtyard. Ilara, feigning a need to fetch herbs from the kitchen garden, passed by, her hand subtly extended. Their touch was fleeting, the parchment passing from her nimble fingers to his gloved palm in an instant, a barely perceptible flicker of movement. Calin, his senses perpetually alert, felt the unexpected contact. His hand closed around the tiny packet, his heart giving a sudden, violent lurch in his chest. He maintained his stoic expression, but a cold dread mixed with a surge of adrenaline coursed through him. Later that evening, in the solitude of his small barracks room, Calin unfolded the parchment. The elegant script, the small rose seal, immediately confirmed his fear and his nascent hope. "Lady Annalise," the words seared into his mind, an impossible invitation. His first reaction was one of profound alarm. This was madness, sheer folly. He, a mere guard, to meet the Duke's daughter under the cloak of night. The consequences of discovery were horrific: public disgrace, imprisonment, perhaps even death for him, and irreparable ruin for her. He paced the cramped room, his mind a whirlwind of duty, loyalty, and a dangerous, undeniable yearning that had begun to take root deep within him. He thought of his family, his aging parents, the reputation he had painstakingly built. He thought of his oath, his honor. But then, an image of Annalise flashed in his mind, her sapphire eyes, the quiet melancholy he had glimpsed, the fleeting touch in the rose garden. He remembered the unspoken understanding that had passed between them. He knew, instinctively, that this invitation was not a frivolous whim. It was an act of desperate courage. To refuse would be to reject a part of himself, to deny the connection he had felt, however dangerous. The risk was immense, the stakes impossibly high, but a force stronger than fear, a burgeoning loyalty and affection, compelled him. He would go. He had to. The parchment, a small, fragile thing, now held the weight of their precarious fates. The night of the rendezvous, a moonless tapestry of velvet black, descended upon the Château de Valois with a weighty silence. Lady Annalise felt a peculiar blend of terror and exhilaration coursing through her veins. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had dismissed Ilara for the night, feigning an early rest, and now, cloaked in a dark, simple gown and a heavy hood, she moved through the labyrinthine corridors of the palace like a shadow. Every creak of the ancient timbers, every distant murmur of a guard's voice, sent a jolt of panic through her. This was not the graceful glide of a noblewoman, it was the furtive scurry of a conspirator. She finally reached the secluded door that led to the west garden. A rarely used entrance known only to a few trusted servants. The cold iron of the door handle felt like ice beneath her gloved hand. With a soft click, she was out, enveloped by the cool night air and the fragrant scent of damp earth and sleeping blossoms. The garden, usually a place of meticulous order, was transformed by the darkness into a mysterious, slightly menacing wilderness. Shadows danced with the swaying branches, mimicking unseen figures. Her breath plumed in the chill air as she made her way towards the old sundial, a silent sentinel carved from weathered stone. Sir Calin was already there, a dark, imposing silhouette against the faint glow of the distant palace lights. He stood with his back to the sundial, his posture still, watchful, a sentinel even in this illicit meeting. He wore a simpler tunic, stripped of the identifying armor, yet his sword remained at his hip, a silent declaration of his readiness. Annalise approached slowly, her heart thundering. He turned as she neared, his eyes, dark and intense, fixing on her. There was no surprise, only a deep, weary acknowledgement. "My lady," he murmured, his voice low, barely a whisper, yet it resonated with an authority that both soothed and startled her. "You came, and you, Sir Calin," she replied, her voice trembling slightly, the formality of her address feeling almost absurd in the intimate, dangerous setting. I know this is highly unconventional, dangerous, indeed, my lady. Danger is my constant companion, but I confess, this particular peril is unique." He paused, his gaze sweeping the shadowy garden, ever vigilant. "May I ask, my lady, why you summoned me?" His tone was respectful, professional, yet a subtle curiosity tinged his words. Annalise gathered her courage, her hands clasped tightly before her. "Because, Sir Calin, I feel suffocated, trapped, and in these gilded walls, among these powdered courtiers, you are the only one who seems real. Forgive my frankness, but I have observed your integrity, your quiet strength. It is a stark contrast to the superficiality of my world, and it calls to me." Callan's expression remained impassive, but his eyes, illuminated by the distant palace lights, seemed to soften for a moment. "My lady, you speak of a truth that many in my station feel. The gilded cage, as you call it, often traps both its prisoners and its guardians." He shifted his weight, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his sword. "But these are dangerous truths to utter, especially between us. Do you understand the immense risk you take merely by standing here?" "I do," Annalise responded, her voice firmer now, fueled by a newfound defiance. "And I understand the risk you take by being here. But I could not continue without seeking some authentic connection. The thought of my destined future, a marriage of convenience, fills me with despair." I felt compelled to seek something more. Their conversation continued in hushed tones, a dance between formality and the burgeoning intimacy of their shared secret. They spoke of the constraints of their lives, the expectations placed upon them, the profound loneliness that wealth and duty could bring. Calin, in turn, spoke of his own aspirations, of the land his family once held, of the honor he sought to uphold despite his humble means. The moon, now a sliver of silver, finally emerged from behind the clouds, casting ethereal light upon them, illuminating the precarious bridge they had dared to build across the chasm of their different worlds. The fear of discovery remained, a palpable presence, yet it was overshadowed by the profound, thrilling exhilaration of finally, truly, connecting. This first clandestine meeting, under the veil of moonlight, was a perilous step into the unknown, a defiant assertion of their individual souls against the rigid decrees of their society. The success of their first secret rendezvous emboldened them, yet also deepened the perilous currents of their burgeoning affection. Over the ensuing months, Lady Annalise and Sir Calin wove a fragile tapestry of clandestine meetings, stealing moments beneath the cloak of night in the secluded corners of the vast palace gardens, or occasionally in disused servants' passages known only to Calin. Each meeting was a thrilling dance with discovery, a testament to their growing courage and the powerful magnetism that drew them together during these stolen hours. The rigid masks of their respective stations began to fall away. Annalise, usually so composed and reserved, confessed the true extent of her unhappiness. "I feel like a piece of property, Calin," she whispered one starlit night, her voice thick with emotion. My father speaks of alliances, of strategic marriages, of strengthening the family line. He sees a title, not a daughter. I am to be bartered, like a prize horse, to the highest bidder, to a man I do not love, cannot love. Her sapphire eyes, usually so guarded, now shone with unshed tears. I long for a life of purpose, of genuine connection, not a life defined by opulence and political maneuvering. She spoke of her poetry, her dreams of intellectual freedom, her longing for a companion who saw beyond her ducal title. Calin listened intently, his strong hands often clasped before him, his gaze unwavering. He, in turn, revealed his own aspirations and fears. My lady, he began one evening, his voice soft but firm, my family, though titled, is impoverished. My position here is one of duty, of earning back a semblance of the honor my father could not secure. I joined the Guard out of necessity, but I stay out of loyalty and a sense of responsibility. Yet, I too dream of more, of a place where merit truly means something, where one's worth is not solely judged by the ancestors on their wall. He spoke of his desire to serve not just a duke, but a cause, of the injustices he observed within the court, of his longing for a life where honesty and courage were valued above all else. He confessed the burden of his oath, which now felt complicated by his profound feelings for her, the very person he was sworn to protect. Their conversations deepened into confessions, laying bare their vulnerabilities, their hopes, and their profound loneliness. They found in each other a kindred spirit, a mirror reflecting their own unspoken desires. The social barriers that had once seemed insurmountable now felt like flimsy curtains, easily parted by the strength of their burgeoning affection. Annalise found Callan's quiet strength and unwavering integrity intoxicating. He saw past her noble title to the intelligent, passionate woman beneath. Callan, in turn, was captivated by Annalise's sharp mind, her artistic soul, and her surprising courage to defy the confines of her birth. When I am with you, Callan, Annalise confessed one night, her hand tentatively reaching out to rest on his arm, a gesture of intimacy that shocked them both. I feel truly alive. I feel seen, understood. Callan gently covered her hand with his own, his touch firm and comforting. And I, my lady, your honesty, your spirit, it gives me strength I did not know I lacked. But this strength comes with a profound consequence. We are playing a dangerous game, one that could cost us everything. Do you truly understand the fate that awaits us if we are discovered? I do, she affirmed, her gaze unwavering, but the thought of a life without this connection, without knowing you, is a greater fear than any punishment. We must be careful, Callan, more careful than ever. Their love blossomed in the shadows, a forbidden flower blooming against all odds. It was a love born of shared secrets, of mutual respect, and a profound understanding that transcended their disparate social stations. The exhilaration of their connection was intertwined with a constant, gnawing fear of discovery. Every stolen glance, every whispered word, every fleeting touch was a defiance, a joyous act of rebellion against a world that sought to keep them apart. They were two souls entwined, bound not by societal decree, but by a love that promised both profound joy and unimaginable peril. As the delicate tendrils of their forbidden love grew stronger, so too did the pervasive air of suspicion within the Château de Valois. The palace, a living organism of whispers and watchful eyes, slowly began to register the subtle shifts in Lady Annalise's demeanor. Her once predictable melancholy had been replaced by a quiet animation, a sparkle in her sapphire eyes that had not been there before. She would sometimes drift into a thoughtful reverie, a small, secret smile playing on her lips, only to snap back to alertness with a startled glance around her. These minute changes, though individually insignificant, began to coalesce into a pattern discernible to those most attuned to the court's undercurrents among the household. There were many who observed. Old Nanette, the head laundress, noticed the faint scent of garden earth on Annalise's nightgowns, more often than seemed appropriate for a lady who rarely ventured out after dark. Jean-Pierre, a sharp-eyed footman who often served Annalise, noted her sometimes unusual requests for solitary walks in the West Garden, long after twilight. And then there was Monsieur Dubois, the Duke's notoriously ambitious and sycophantic chamberlain, a man whose every breath was dedicated to currying favor. Dubois, always keen to expose any potential scandal that might elevate his own standing, possessed a preternatural ability to sense weakness or impropriety. He had observed Callan's unwavering, almost unnerving, professionalism, contrasting it with a certain tension in his shoulders whenever Lady Annalise was near. He found it curious, a subtle anomaly in the guard's otherwise flawless conduct. Kalen, ever the vigilant sentinel, also sensed the shift. The atmosphere, once merely watchful, now felt actively predatory. He noticed the lingering glances of certain servants, the way conversations would abruptly cease when he entered a room, the increased frequency of Monsieur Dubois's presence near his patrol routes. He knew, with a soldier's instinct, that their secret was not as impenetrable as they wished. He became hyper-aware, his senses perpetually heightened, every shadow a potential informer, every murmur a threat. He and Annalise had to become even more cautious, their meetings scarcer, their exchanges briefer and more guarded. The joy of their stolen moments was now tinged with a constant, gnawing fear of impending discovery. One morning, at breakfast, the Duke, Annalise's father, a man of formidable presence and piercing intellect, made a passing comment that sent a chill down her spine. "Annalise," he said, his eyes fixed on her with unnerving intensity, "you have been rather spirited of late. Your walks in the garden, particularly after sunset, have not gone unnoticed. I trust you are merely enjoying the evening air, and not entertaining fanciful notions." His tone was light, almost jovial, but the underlying warning was unmistakable. A thinly veiled admonition that left her blood cold. She mumbled a vague agreement, her heart pounding, acutely aware that her secret joy was becoming her greatest vulnerability. Kalen, too, faced increased scrutiny. His commander, Captain Devereux, a stern but fair man, summoned him for a routine review. Thorne Devereux stated, his gaze scrutinizing Kellen's face, "You are an exemplary guard. However, I have noticed a certain distraction. Ensure your focus remains solely on your duties. The Duke values loyalty above all else." It was not a direct accusation, but a clear warning, indicating that Kellen's conduct, however professional, was under a microscope. Kalen nodded, maintaining his composure, but he understood the implied threat. The walls of their precarious sanctuary were beginning to crumble, the whispers on the wind growing louder, promising a storm of unprecedented fury. The net was closing, and they both knew it, the tightening coils making their defiant love feel all the more precious, and all the more doomed. The premonition of discovery, once a distant shadow, materialized with brutal swiftness on a cool, moonless night in late summer of 1690. Lady Annalise and Sir Kalen, lulled by a false sense of security after several weeks of uninterrupted meetings, had grown slightly less vigilant. They were in their most cherished rendezvous spot, a small, overgrown grotto tucked deep within the west garden, its entrance concealed by a thick curtain of climbing ivy. They spoke in hushed tones, their hands clasped, lost in the intimacy of their shared secrets. "My heart aches for you," Kalen, Annalise whispered, leaning her head against his shoulder. "This constant fear, it is a heavy price to pay for a few stolen moments. It is a price I would pay 1,000 times over." "My lady," Kalen replied, his voice rough with emotion, his arm tightening around her. "To know you, to love you, it is worth every peril." It was precisely at that tender, vulnerable moment that the rustle of leaves, louder than any nocturnal creature, shattered their peace. A sudden, harsh beam of lantern light pierced the darkness, cutting through the ivy. "There, as I suspected," a voice roared, thick with vindictive triumph. Monsieur Dubois, the Duke's chamberlain, stood at the grotto's entrance, his face contorted into a sneering mask of satisfaction. Behind him, silhouetted against the flickering light, stood Duke Armand de Valois himself, his formidable figure radiating fury. Flanked by several grim-faced guards, Annalise gasped, tearing herself from Kellen's embrace, her hands flying to her mouth. Her blood ran cold. The world tilted. She stared at her father, his face a thundercloud of rage, his eyes burning with betrayal. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the rapid thumping of her own heart. Kalen, ever the soldier, pushed Annalise behind him, drawing his sword with a practiced, desperate swiftness. "My Lord Duke," he began, his voice surprisingly steady despite the overwhelming odds, "I beg you, spare the lady from this spectacle." "Spectacle," the Duke thundered, his voice echoing through the silent garden. "You, a common guard, dare to defile my daughter, my family's honor, and then speak of spectacles. Guards, seize him." "And you, Annalise," his gaze, usually warm with paternal affection, was now colder than ice. "You will return to your chambers. This disgrace will be dealt with most severely." Two guards lunged at Kaelin, their swords drawn. Kaelin, outnumbered but fueled by a desperate desire to protect Annalise, fought with a ferocity born of love and despair. He parried, he dodged, his blade flashing in the moonlight, a desperate dance against inevitable capture. "No, father, please," Annalise cried, rushing forward, only to be roughly intercepted by two other guards who held her firmly by the arms. She struggled, tears streaming down her face, watching in horror as Kaelin was finally overwhelmed. A blow from a musket butt sent him sprawling to the ground, his sword clattering away. He lay there, dazed, but his eyes found Annalise's, holding her gaze with an unwavering intensity, a silent promise of enduring love amidst the chaos. "Take him to the deepest dungeon," the Duke commanded, his voice shaking with barely contained rage, "and confine Lady Annalise to her chambers. Let no one pass. This scandal will be erased ruthlessly and completely." Annalise was dragged away, her cries echoing through the garden, as Kaelin was roughly hauled to his feet, his hands bound. The golden cage had not only closed but had now been revealed as a brutal prison. The storm had broken, and its destructive force threatened to annihilate everything they held dear, transforming their clandestine love into a public disgrace, a tragic tableau of inevitable ruin. The immediate aftermath of their discovery was a maelstrom of punitive action, swift and merciless, aimed at eradicating the very memory of their transgression. Sir Kaelin was dragged, bruised and battered, through the cold, echoing corridors beneath the palace to the ducal dungeon, a place of damp stone and despair. The air was thick with the stench of mildew and human misery. His armor, once a symbol of his honor, was stripped from him, his sword confiscated. He was chained to a cold stone wall, his wrists chafed raw by the iron manacles. The interrogation began almost immediately, a brutal assault orchestrated by the Duke's most trusted and most ruthless interrogator. "Confess your sorcery, your illicit spells upon the lady," the interrogator barked, his face a sneering mask in the flickering torchlight. "How did you corrupt her? What promises did you whisper into her ear?" Blows rained down, designed to break his spirit, to extract a confession that would paint him as a villain and Annalise as a helpless victim of his dark machinations. But Kaelin, despite the pain, remained defiant. "I bewitched no one," he gasped, blood trickling from his lip. "I spoke only of truth, and she, of her own free will, chose to listen. There was no corruption, only love." He refused to implicate Annalise further, to allow them to paint her as anything less than a woman of agency and profound courage. His resolve, even in the depths of torture, was absolute. Meanwhile, Lady Annalise was confined to her private chambers, transformed overnight from a sanctuary into a luxurious prison. The heavy oak doors were barred from the outside, two formidable guards stationed at all times. Ilara, her trusted maid, was forbidden to attend her, replaced by stern-faced women handpicked by her father. The lavish tapestries, the ornate furniture, the silken gowns, all now felt like instruments of her confinement, mocking her with their beauty. She paced her room like a caged animal, her mind a tempest of grief, fear, and impotent rage. She saw Kaelin's face in the darkness, heard his cries, imagined his suffering, and each thought was a fresh stab to her heart. Her father, Duke Armand, visited her the following day, his face etched with a cold fury that chilled her to the bone. "Annalise," he began, his voice dangerously low, "you have brought shame upon our house, shame that could ruin us all. Your indiscretion with the common guard, it is an unforgivable stain." "He is not common, father," she retorted, her voice raw. "He is a man of honor, more so than any of your sycophantic courtiers, and I am no child to be scolded for a childish prank. I love him, father, truly and deeply." His hand lashed out, a stinging blow across her cheek that left a burning mark. "Silence. You speak of love. This is madness, a disease that has infected your mind. You will forget this peasant. You will repent your foolishness. For his sake, if not for your own, you will forget him." His words were a threat, a promise of further torment should she persist in her defiance. He then spoke of her immediate future, a political marriage designed to quell the scandal, to erase the very memory of Kaelin. Annalise collapsed onto her bed after he left, her body racked with sobs. But her spirit, though wounded, remained unbroken. They could chain Kaelin, they could imprison her, they could try to force her into a loveless marriage, but they could not erase the love that had bloomed between them. In their separate prisons, bound by different chains, their love remained a defiant flame, a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. Kaelin endured the beatings, clutching to the memory of her defiance. Annalise bore the isolation, clinging to the image of his unwavering eyes. Their ordeal was just beginning, but the depth of their affection, forged in the fires of adversity, had only strengthened. The Duke Armand de Valois acted with the ruthless efficiency of a man desperate to protect his family's honor and political standing. The scandal, though confined within the palace walls for now, was a festering wound that threatened to erupt, to quell the whispers, to reassert control, and to publicly erase the stain of his daughter's indiscretion. The Duke made a drastic decision. Lady Annalise would be immediately betrothed to a powerful suitor, Count Armand de Montaigne, a man notorious for his cold demeanor and vast estates. A man almost twice Annalise's age. The announcement came like a thunderclap, delivered by her father in a cold, impassive tone, as she sat, still confined, in her chambers. You will marry Count Montaigne within the month. It is decided. This alliance will repair the damage you have wrought. You will do your duty, Annalise, or face consequences far graver than mere confinement. He made it clear that Kellen's fate hung in the balance. Her compliance would ensure a swift, albeit harsh, sentence for him, perhaps exile instead of execution. Her defiance, however, would seal his doom. Annalise felt her stomach clench, her world collapsing around her. Count Montaigne was everything she loathed in a man: arrogant, calculating, with eyes that assessed women like property. The thought of being bound to him for life, of exchanging vows with him while her heart belonged to Kalan, was a torture far worse than any physical pain. It was a forced march towards a loveless, barren future, a complete annihilation of her spirit. She wanted to scream, to rage, to fight, but her father's words about Kellen's fate silenced her. She was caught in an impossible bind, her compliance for Kellen's life, her defiance for his death. The betrothal ceremony was a somber affair, devoid of joy, hastily arranged in the grand hall. The court was present, a sea of solemn faces, their eyes darting between the pale, grief-stricken Annalise and the stern, triumphant Count Annalise, dressed in a heavy gown of dark velvet, felt like a ghost in her own body. Her hand, trembling, was reluctantly placed in the Count's cold, bony grasp. His touch sent shivers of revulsion through her. She forced a blank expression, her eyes fixed on some distant point, avoiding the gazes of her family, who stood behind her, their faces grim but resolute, relieved that the scandal was being managed. While Annalise stood at the altar, making a vow that felt like a betrayal of her very soul, Kaelin languished in the dungeon. He was informed of the betrothal by a sneering guard, the news delivered with a cruel satisfaction: your lady is to be wed to a count, a proper match, unlike your peasant dreams. The words were like a physical blow, heavier than any of the interrogator's fists. He felt a profound sense of despair, not for himself, but for Anna. He imagined her standing there, a captive bride, forced to renounce their love for the sake of her family's name. His heart ached for her, for the loss of their fragile, defiant dream. Kellen's sentence, though not yet formalized, loomed over him, likely exile to the most distant, desolate reaches of the Duke's territories, or a lifetime of hard labor. The Duke, in a twisted act of mercy influenced by the necessity of Annalise's cooperation, deemed execution too public, too likely to immortalize Kaelin as a martyr. But to Kaelin, the thought of living without Annalise, knowing her bound to another, felt like a living death. Their love, once a secret, vibrant flame, had been violently extinguished by the brutal decree of an unforgiving society. The betrothal was not just a political maneuver, it was a cruel, public declaration of their broken vow, a future forsaken, leaving them both adrift in a sea of despair. The betrothal ceremony, though a public declaration of her future, ignited a fierce, defiant spark within Lady Annalise. The despair that had threatened to consume her now coalesced into a steely resolve. She might be forced into a loveless marriage, but she would not allow Kaelin to suffer for a love she wholeheartedly embraced. The thought of him languishing in the dungeon, facing a grim future, spurred her to action. Her confinement to her chambers, initially a torment, now became an opportunity for intricate plotting. Her mind, sharp and strategic, began to weave a desperate plan of escape. Her first and most crucial step was to re-establish contact with someone she could trust. Her former lady's maid Alara had been dismissed from her service but remained in the palace, assigned to the Annalise, Nuelara's loyalty ran deep, through subtle hints and a carefully folded note slipped to a sympathetic younger maid. Annalise managed to arrange a brief, secret meeting with Alara in the palace's hidden laundry room. There, amidst the steaming vats and drying linens, Annalise laid bare her heart and her audacious plan. "Alara, I know I ask of you something perilous," Annalise whispered, her voice urgent, "but I cannot let him rot in that dungeon. I cannot live knowing he suffers for my sake. I must free him." She spoke of the dungeon's layout, gleaned from overheard conversations and childhood explorations, of a rarely used service tunnel that purportedly led to the outer stable yards. She needed keys, a diversion, and a contact on the outside to secure horses and safe passage. Alara, her eyes wide with fear but her resolve firm, nodded. "My lady, you know I would lay down my life for you. Tell me what to do." Annalise's plan was intricate and audacious. She instructed Alara to make contact with old Master Thorn, Kellen's father, a respected but impoverished knight who lived on the edge of the ducal lands. Master Thorn, she reasoned, would do anything to save his son. He could arrange for horses and a meeting point beyond the ducal estate. Simultaneously, Alara was to subtly befriend one of the younger guards now stationed at the dungeon entrance, a naive but good-hearted recruit named Thomas. Thomas was known for his fondness for strong spirits and his susceptibility to a pretty face. "You must procure a powerful sleeping draught from the apothecary," Annalise instructed Alara. "And then, on the night of my marriage, when the palace is in chaos and celebration, you must use it. Thomas, I believe, will be easily swayed by a shared drink and a pretty smile. Once he sleeps, you must find the keys to Kellen's cell." She had sketched a crude map of the dungeon's lower levels from memory, indicating the precise location of Kellen's cell and the forgotten tunnel. Annalise then turned her attention to the diversion. The night of her wedding, she reasoned, would be a night of grand celebrations, of drunken revelry amongst the lower staff, and even some guards. Such a night would provide the perfect cover. She would feign illness during the wedding feast, retiring early, but not before ensuring her personal maid for the night, a new, untrustworthy girl, was suitably distracted or dismissed. The plan was fraught with risk, every step dependent on perfect timing and unwavering courage. The consequences of failure were unthinkable: immediate execution for Kellen, and a fate far worse than mere marriage for herself. In the long, dark hours leading up to the wedding, Annalise worked tirelessly, preparing. She fashioned a small pouch of gold coins, hidden in the lining of a forgotten gown, a bribe for anyone who might prove an obstacle. She memorized the layout of the palace's back passages, rehearsed her feigned illness, and mentally charted the precise movements required. The golden cage, once her prison, would now become the stage for her most daring act of rebellion. She was no longer a trapped bird, but a strategist, a woman driven by a love so profound it defied all reason, determined to pluck Kellen from the jaws of despair, no matter the cost to herself. The air on the night of the wedding, a chill autumn evening in 1691, crackled with a potent mixture of forced celebration and nervous anticipation. Annalise had performed her role flawlessly during the ceremony, a pale, silent bride, her vows barely audible. At the lavish feast that followed, she feigned a sudden malaise, gracefully retiring to her chambers, dismissing her new maid with a wave of her hand and a promise of extra coin. The heavy doors clicked shut, plunging her into a silence that was both terrifying and exhilarating. This was it. The moment had arrived. Outside, the palace hummed with the drunken revelry of the wedding. Amidst the chaos, Alara moved with remarkable courage. She had successfully administered the powerful sleeping draught to Thomas, the young dungeon guard, disguised in a tankard of ale. He was now slumped in his chair, snoring softly. With trembling hands, Alara had secured the heavy iron keys from his belt, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She navigated the labyrinthine passages to Kellen's cell, her small lamp casting dancing shadows on the damp walls. The sight of Kellen gaunt and chained sent a fresh wave of grief and resolve through her. "Sir Kellen," she whispered urgently, fumbling with the keys. Kellen, weak but alert, recognized her instantly. "Ilada, Annalise," he croaked, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Is she well?" Alara quickly explained Annalise's plan, her words a rapid stream of instruction and encouragement. With a heavy clunk, the lock gave way. Kellen, his body stiff and aching, pushed open the cell door, emerging into the dim corridor. He paused only to retrieve his confiscated sword and a practical, dark tunic Ilara had brought. "Lead the way," he commanded, a spark of his old strength returning to his eyes, fueled by the knowledge of Annalise's bravery. Back in her chambers, Annalise had secured a small, inconspicuous travel cloak and a pouch of her hidden jewels. She moved to the prearranged meeting point, a small, rarely used service entrance near the kitchens, which led directly into a secluded alleyway. Her hands were clammy, her breath shallow. Every distant laugh, every clatter from the kitchens, seemed amplified, threatening to expose her. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Just as despair began to creep in, a subtle scrape of stone signaled their approach. Kalen, leaning heavily on Ilara, emerged from the shadows. His face was gaunt, but his eyes, when they met Annalise's, blazed with an intensity that spoke volumes. "My lady," he breathed, his voice raw with emotion. "Kalen." Annalise rushed forward, throwing her arms around him, holding him tightly. His body was stiff, bruised, but he was alive. It was a brief, tearful reunion, a moment suspended between terror and profound relief. "We must go," she whispered, pulling back, her gaze firm. "My father will soon discover my absence." They moved with desperate urgency through the rain-swept alley. Ilara, having played her part, bid them a tearful farewell, promising to throw any pursuers off their scent. Kalen and Annalise, hand in hand, stumbled through the darkness, their hearts pounding in unison. They knew the risks. If caught now, their fate would be sealed, brutally and irrevocably. They passed under the shadow of the imposing palace walls, a symbol of their past, now a structure to escape. The stable master, loyal to Kalen's father, awaited them with 2 swift horses, cloaked and ready. With one last look back at the grand, deceptive silhouette of the Chateau de Valois, they mounted the horses, spurred them into a gallop, and rode out into the unknown, leaving behind the gilded cage and the life of privilege, embracing a treacherous night and an uncertain but shared future. Their escape was a daring act of love, a defiant flight into the freedom they had longed for. But a perilous journey had only just begun. The thunderous hooves of their horses beat a desperate rhythm against the rain-soaked earth, carrying Lady Annalise and Sir Kalen away from the suffocating grandeur of the Chateau de Valois. The night was a canvas of inky black, broken only by the flashes of distant lightning and the occasional glint of moonlight through racing clouds. They rode without pause, without direction beyond a general heading away from the Duke's domain, their bodies aching, their hearts pounding with a potent mix of terror and exhilarating freedom. Kalen, though still weak from his imprisonment, rode with a renewed vigor, his arm instinctively reaching back to steady Annalise as they traversed treacherous paths. "Are you all right, my lady?" Kalen shouted over the wind, his voice raw with concern. "I am free, and with you. That is all that matters." Annalise cried back, a joyous, defiant laugh escaping her lips, even as the cold rain plastered her hair to her face. For the first time in her life, she felt truly unbound. The societal chains that had defined her existence shattered by this audacious flight. The jewels she had secreted away were a small comfort, a means to an uncertain end, but their true wealth lay in their shared courage and their unwavering love. They rode through the night, crossing into the bordering duchy, just as dawn painted the eastern sky with hues of rose and violet. They found refuge in a small, isolated cottage, its owner, a distant relative of Kalen's father, who, having received word of their plight, offered them a safe, if temporary, haven. The old woman, her face weathered by years, looked at Annalise, then at Kalen, her eyes filled with a mixture of sympathy and awe. "Love makes fools of us all, my dears," she chuckled, "but it also makes heroes." In the days and weeks that followed, they learned to live a life stripped of privilege and pretense. Annalise, the noblewoman, learned to cook, to clean, to mend clothes, tasks utterly alien to her former life. Kalen, the palace guard, took up work as a woodsman, his strong hands, once trained for a sword, now wielding an axe. Their world had shrunk to the confines of the small cottage and the surrounding forest. Yet it was infinitely larger than the gilded cage of the palace. They spoke for hours, their conversations deepening their bond, solidifying their mutual respect. They were no longer lady and sir, but Annalise and Kalen, 2 souls bound by shared adversity and an unbreakable love. They knew their freedom was precarious. The Duke's agents would be searching, their wrath immense. They moved from place to place, never staying too long, always looking over their shoulders, always aware of the sword of Damocles hanging over their heads. They traded their jewels for coin, for food, for passage, slowly shedding the last vestiges of their former lives. Their journey was not without its hardships. There were days of hunger, nights of cold, moments of fear when they heard distant hoofbeats or caught a glimpse of a suspicious figure. Yet, through it all, their love remained their guiding star, their anchor in a world turned upside down. They found strength in each other, comfort in their shared glances, solace in the touch of a hand. They were not living a fairy tale, but a hard-won reality, forged in defiance and sustained by an unyielding affection. Years passed. The whispers of the noblewoman who ran off with her guard eventually faded from the courtly gossip, replaced by new scandals and new alliances. Duke Armand de Valois eventually died, a bitter man, never fully recovering from the stain on his family name. Count Montaigne married another, a more compliant, if less spirited, bride. Annalise and Calin, though never truly free from the specter of their past, managed to carve out a quiet, anonymous life in a distant, forested village. They had a small home, a garden, and the simple joy of each other's company. They raised a family, their children inheriting their mother's sapphire eyes and their father's quiet strength. Their story became a legend whispered among the common folk, a testament to love's power over title and tradition. They had chosen love over luxury, freedom over duty, and in doing so, had etched their names not in the annals of nobility, but in the timeless narrative of the human heart. Their love, born in peril and sustained by defiance, remained a beacon, a living testament that true connection, genuine affection, could indeed defy the rigid decrees of the world, leaving a mark far more enduring than any fleeting crown or kingdom.